All right, back with another one of these playoff predictor videos. If you missed the one last week, the way this works is I use the ESPN playoff machine to I pick every single game the rest of the way through the season, and then just simply look at where that spits every team out, who's getting in what seed. And then what I do is I look into what that means and what actually has to happen for those 7 teams to get in. Because, of course, I am going to be wrong about some of these games, even though I try my best to be right about them. And there's things where, like, for example, Tampa Bay is, I'm projecting them to go 5-1 because they have an easy schedule. Does that mean they'll actually go 5-1, though, is the question. So we'll talk about all of it. Let's just get into it. And if you're still confused, you'll figure it out as we go. So first, let's look at the NFC and talk about where each team currently is, where I have every team ending up. I have the Lions in the 1 seed, the Eagles in the 2 seed. That's the same as last week. Tampa Bay still is the 3 seed. Again, sounds crazy, but due to their easy schedule, that's where they end up. We'll talk about them a little bit more. We'll also talk about the whole NFC West a little bit more, as that's a crazy division, but I do now actually have Seattle as my pick for who's going to be getting in if every game holds. Definitely hanging on by a thread, though. That could go either way. The Packers and Vikings feel pretty locked into the 5 and 6 seed. The only question is which one's going to be the 5 seed and which one's going to be the 6 seed, which I'm not really going to get into. That's I'm more going to focus on what teams need to do to get either into the playoffs or into the 1 seed. And then I have Washington still getting the 7 seed. We'll talk about them. That is no longer a lock the way it kind of felt a couple weeks ago. So let's start off with, let's show the whole conference now. As you see, the teams in bold are the ones who are making the playoffs, and there's really, I would say there's, once again, 4 teams that you really look at as maybe they could be playoff teams. There's still the entire NFC West, although it's looking rough for San Francisco. We'll talk about them in just a second. Atlanta is the other team that you look at and say they in Tampa Bay feel like that's a neck-and-neck race. Let's actually start there. First, I kind of already brought up Tampa Bay's schedule. I'll put it on the screen. You see I have 1 loss on their schedule, 1 projected loss. That is to the Chargers. So it's the thing where they will be favored, and probably decent favorites, in 5 out of these 6 games. I think the Saints game could end up being close just because that team has a history of beating Tampa Bay in key spots, especially in Tampa Bay. The Chargers game Chargers will be favored, although that is a game that also could flip, and that would be huge for Tampa Bay if they can flip that game. If they go 5-1, I do think they get in. The question is just, can they go 5-1? They already got one of the games done, but that's just what we're going to have to wait on, and that would be enough, the way I have it, for them to get the division and get the 3 seed, although that is not guaranteed. Because if you look over at Atlanta's schedule now, I still have them with 3 projected losses, and that's a pretty big deal, right? Because for Atlanta, there's 2 ways to look at this. One is, well, that's not good. We have 3 projected losses. Those are 3 games that we might not win. The benefit, though, is if they can just flip one of those games, they're winning the division. That's all they need to do, because they have the tiebreaker over Tampa Bay. So if they can go 4-2 the rest of the way, they're in almost certainly. I mean, Tampa Bay would literally have to win out to make sure that Atlanta could falter. If Atlanta won one of the first 2 games, then what would happen is they would get the 4 seed, the Seahawks would move up to the 3 seed, and the Buccaneers would be out of the playoffs. However, if they win the Commanders game instead, they would still get the 4 seed, but the Commanders would drop out of the playoffs, and Tampa Bay would get the 7 seed. Let's go to the Commanders now. You see I do have them projected to lose to the Philadelphia Eagles, given that the Eagles already won, and I just think the Eagles are playing better football right now than the Commanders. But you look at this schedule, there's some good and some bad. The good news is that if everything else holds the way it needs to right now, and you even lose one extra game, you're okay, as long as it's not the Atlanta game. The Atlanta game would hurt because that would bump Atlanta up to the division, and then Tampa Bay would be in a wild card spot instead of in a division spot, and they have the tiebreaker over the Commanders. So you would have to make sure that you don't lose that game. You can lose the Titans, Saints, or Cowboys game if everything else holds. Now, again, if you lose one of those games and Atlanta picks up an extra game, and then Tampa Bay does go 5-1, then you're in trouble. There's also the X factor of, we'll talk about the Cardinals and Seahawks in just a second. If they both pick up an extra win that I have them getting, then just Washington's straight up in trouble. They would still be okay as long as they get their 11 wins. But if they don't get those 11 wins, then they are then they would be out. So really, 11 wins has to be what you need, and you would love to get 12 and not even have to worry about it. But 11 wins should get you in. You'd feel good about 11 wins. But you got to make sure you get there. I don't know if 10 will be enough for Washington because they don't have all the tiebreakers. Now let's go over to the Cardinals, who as of right now I do not have in a playoff spot. However, one of those two first games flip, even the Vikings game. If that flips, the Cardinals are in a they then are in a playoff spot. As I mentioned, even if the Cardinals are able to flip a game, if let's say the Cardinals beat the Vikings and the Seahawks, who also play the Vikings, if both of those two teams are able to beat the Vikings and everything else holds, and they each end up with 11 wins, that actually means that if everything else holds, only one of them is getting into the playoffs. It would be the Seahawks would get in. So for Arizona, that's a little tough in terms of getting a wild card spot. The easiest way might be the division. You still look at that Seahawks game in 2 weeks and have to think that's kind of the game. That's kind of what's going to determine it, right? I mean, not a guarantee, but that's what you look at. You look at Seattle, who again I have currently projecting to beat the Cardinals in 2 weeks. That's where I'm at, just because they just beat the Cardinals, so that feels fair. But at the same time, if that game flips the other way, then Arizona's probably making the playoffs. So this really could come down to who wins that game. Of course, for Arizona, if they can flip one of their losses, or if Seattle loses an extra game, like say to the Bears or to the Rams to end the season, that would be enough for you to get in. As for the Rams, you see I have 3 projected losses, so that's difficult. However, if they can go 3-1 in the next 4 games, I have them beating San Francisco, that's no guarantee. But if they can go 3-1 down the stretch here, what that means is, yes, I have them currently projected to lose to the Cardinals and Seahawks. If they can flip both of those games, beat both of those two teams, that would put them at 10 wins. That would give them enough to win the division, because that drops both the Cardinals and the Seahawks to 9 wins. So definitely the Rams are in play here. They need to go 3-1. Really, they need to go 5-1 down the stretch. They can afford to lose the Bills game, but they need to win every other game. If they can do it, though, they can still get in. And, hey, if you can find yourself on Week 17 only needing to win both of your games to get into the playoffs, you feel okay about where you're at, given how the season started. Finally, the 49ers, who I just have only winning 1 game down the stretch. I have them beating the Bears, but then losing to the Bills, Dolphins, Rams, Cardinals, and Lions. Some of those games can be flipped, but for them to make it, I mean, what do they have to do here? They nearly have to win out. In fact, the way I currently have everything set up, they would have to win out. If I'm right about everything else, which of course I won't be, but if I were to be right about everything else, that's what they would need, is to go 6-0 in a stretch where I think they're going to be underdogs in 5 of those games. They got their work cut out for them. Chicago next week, that's a game that you can win. Got to make sure you take care of business there to keep the season alive. Actually, correction. The chart's a little bit off. I did this on a couple teams, which I'm not going to do again. I thought it would look cleaner format-wise, but I realized that it now puts the dates out of order. So you look at the dates, it's a little bit out of order. It's actually the Bills next week, so that's the game that they need to keep their season alive. Might be tough. As for the 1 seed, remember, I have the Lions with a 1-game lead over the Eagles. The Lions also have the tiebreaker over the Eagles. Interestingly enough, these two teams did not play each other this season and won't play each other this season, because if you remember, the Eagles did not get did not win the division last year, so they don't have the first place schedule. They have a second place schedule, so because of that makes the Lions' schedule a little bit tougher. They're going to get the tiebreaker if those two teams end up with the same record and they don't play each other. So for the Lions, what that rambling meant was that the Eagles need more than one thing to get the 1 seed. If the Lions go undefeated here, only lose the one game this season, then they're the 1 seed. If they drop one of these games, then they're still the 1 seed because I have the Eagles also going undefeated down the stretch. So you can drop a game to, let's say, the Packers. You can drop a game to the Bills. If you drop both games, though, then the Eagles are in great shape. Then the Eagles would get the 1 seed. The issue with that, though, looking at the Eagles' schedule, is they have their work cut out for them to be able to go undefeated down the stretch. You have the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Commanders still on a schedule. It's going to be tough. I think the Lions they feel pretty good about themselves as the 1 seed, but it's not official, so figured I'd bring that up as well. So, yeah, that's most of what I have to say about the NFC. Let's move over to the AFC now. You look at the 7 teams, a few surprises. For one thing, I do still have the Chiefs with a pretty solid lead as the 1st seed right now. Also, I have Baltimore now as the 3 seed. I did have Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, I just don't feel as good about anymore. So I had them winning some big games last week. I don't think that's going to happen. If you look at Houston, I have them as the 4 seed with a 9-8 record, so I think Houston might lose some games down the stretch. And I have Miami now as the 7 spot. I had Denver last week. It could be either one of those teams. Let's start off with that 7 seed. Well, actually, let's hold off on it. First, let's go to the entire conference. Again, you see where I have some of these other teams ending up. I have Denver and Miami both winning 10 games. Miami will get in with a tiebreaker. The Colts right behind with a 9-8 record. The Bengals at 7-10. Those are the playoff hopefuls. So those are the teams. But let's actually start with the 1 seed. I brought up that the Chiefs are in a pretty good spot. What would have to happen is the Bills would need 2 games to flip. You look at the Chiefs' schedule, and could they lose some of these games? I mean, listen, they nearly lost to the Panthers, right? So absolutely, they could drop 2 of these games. They play the Steelers. Again, this is the formatting is off. So the Broncos game is the last game of the season. They play the Steelers before that. They play the Chargers before that. They play the Texans before that. And even the Raiders have been known to give them trouble here and there. So could they drop, 1 or 2 of those games? It's certainly possible. If they drop 1, the Bills still do have a chance because you look at their schedule. I have on December 15th, the Lions beating the Bills. If that game flips the other way, if the Bills can pull off that victory, and they go 6-0, then all they need is 1 Kansas City Chiefs loss, and they're the 1 seed. So it's in play. I think Kansas City probably does take it, but it's very much in play. A loss for the Chiefs would matter pretty significantly. Let's talk about the Texans. Is there a way the Texans could, I've heard people say, are they this year's Jaguars? Are they going to start off strong and then fall off a cliff and miss the playoffs? Well, they're actually in a pretty good spot to still make the playoffs. You look at where they're at right now, only 5 games remaining. I have them going 2-3 and still making the postseason because they aren't in a very tough division. And those 2 wins are against Jacksonville and against Tennessee, who, in fairness, did beat them already this season, just last week. But I also have the Texans losing to the Dolphins, Chiefs, and Ravens. Can they flip one of those games the other way? Sure. I think Miami's probably the easiest shot at that. But even with this, it puts them in a tiebreaker with the Colts. Since they beat the Colts twice this year, they have the tiebreaker. As for the Colts, you look at their schedule, it's very easy, right? Patriots, Titans, Giants, and Jaguars. Those are 4 games the Colts will be favored to win. Doesn't mean they will win all 4 of those games, though. I do have the Broncos winning on December 15th. If that game flips, then Colts would be in playoffs. Colts would get the 4 seed. The Texans would be out, but that's a lot to ask for of this Colts team to go 5-0 down the stretch. But hey, you got a shot if you're the Indianapolis Colts. And in fact, for the Colts, if you were to win out and then the Texans still won a game, you'd still be in the playoffs. If the Texans won an extra game, you'd still be in the playoffs. You would be the 7 seed as long as a team doesn't win more than 10 games in the playoff hunt. Let's talk about that 7 seed now. Let's go to Miami, what do they need to have happen to keep the 7 spot? As I said, I currently have them getting the 7 spot, but they really need to go 5-1 down the stretch to make this happen. The 1 loss is, again, formatting is weird. It's next week. It's actually Thanksgiving. They play the Packers. That's their 1 scheduled loss. If they can flip that game, it would just make things way easier because then they just need to go 4-1 as opposed to 5-0 down the stretch. And there are games that I think would be not layups. I mean, the 2 Jets games are layups. Even the Browns can be a little bit, they can be frisky now with Jameis Winston. You also have the 49ers and the Texans, well, I think both of those two teams are reeling. Neither one of those teams are like easy W's. So going 5-0 could be tough down the stretch, but very possible. If that happens and everything else holds, then I have them, getting the 7th seed. But will everything else hold? Well, you look at Denver. I mean, again, the Dolphins are really hanging on by a thread here, because if Denver can beat the Browns, Colts, and Bengals, which is no guarantee, those are 3 games that I think all of them, the other team will be competitive in. But if Denver can pull that off, you then look at the Chargers game. Could that flip? It's a divisional game. It's possible. And then the Chiefs, who the Broncos should have beaten already this season. And it's worth mentioning the Chiefs might be resting their starters. We don't know as of right now. It's too early for me to say, oh, they'll probably be resting their starters, because like I said, one Chiefs loss, and then they would have something to play for the final game of the season. So if you're a Broncos fan, weirdly, you want the Chiefs to win. That's not usually a spot you're in, but if the Chiefs can just win out and you can get a Bills loss, then you're all right. The Chiefs will rest their starters. I guess what you would really want if you're a Broncos fan is for the Chiefs to just like lose out and be locked into a playoff spot that isn't the 1 seed, but I think I'm not sure if that's going to happen. So that's how Denver gets in, is flipping one of those 2 games, or if Miami just goes 4-2, which is very possible, and then you can just, you can win these 3 games and you're in. So you're still in an all right spot if you're Denver, but you got to deal with Miami. You do. As for the Bengals, so I already touched on the Colts and what they need to do. So this will be the last kind of playoff hopeful team we have to talk about in the AFC. Is there a way for them to get in? Yes. They got to go 6-0. And I think that's probably just what they're going to need, is they're going to have to go undefeated down the stretch if they're going to find a way to make it in. That would put them at 10-7. That would get them in, though. That would get you the 10 seed, or excuse me, the 7 seed. Actually, weirdly, sweeping the Steelers would knock the Steelers all the way out of the playoffs, so maybe I could have talked about them a little, but I think the Steelers will be okay. But if Cincinnati can pull off that game against Pittsburgh, then they play the Cowboys, the Titans, and the Browns. Those are 3 games they will be favored to win, and all of a sudden, okay, you're going to need to beat Denver. That's not an impossible task. And you're going to need to beat Pittsburgh again. That seems like the toughest part, is can they sweep Pittsburgh? But no margin for error. Have to go undefeated, but you can't count them out just yet. So, yeah, that's where every team is at right now. That's what every team needs to have happen to make the postseason, and that's what I think will happen. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you made it to the end of this video, you should, if you like hearing what I had to say about things, and you like watching movies, check out my movie channel. The link is in the description for that. It's called Jackson Kruger Movies. But yeah, again, thank you to everybody for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.